Victoria returns to lockdown. Let's have a look. Good evening, everyone. Florian.heise here, and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. I'm breaking with tradition, and I've got my can of Bundy rum. Don't worry, it's got no sugar. And I thought, well, for tonight's video, I probably need it. Because Victoria has once again returned to lockdown. They have reimposed lockdowns. Now, before we get into this article or look at a few other things, I have some secret footage that I have discovered that is showing the actual process of locking down the towers in Victoria. And I'll show that to you. Now, you could have seen it earlier on the HeiseSays Facebook page. I tend to keep my secret footage available there. So let's just have a quick look. You can see here, Daniel Andrews bravely going straight to the lockdown location.
Sitting duck out there.
He knows what he's doing.
Victoria's looking a bit worse for wear at the moment. Times have been, economically, it's been a bit hard down there.
I am the law. Drop your weapon. These clubs are under arrest.
So you can see why people are perhaps a little frustrated in Victoria. And that's obviously a bit of a joke, but I think it resonates quite well with what's going down in Victoria at the moment, with the state-imposed lockdowns. Now, before we go through a few articles, I thought we'll jump over here and we'll have a look at the John Hopkins. Now, this is the CSSE dashboard, the Centre for Systems Science and Engineering at Johns Hopkins University. And this is a great way just to get an overview of the state of this global pandemic, how the coronavirus is, spreading around the world in different nations and different locations. Now, I know you've got some people who believe it's, not real, others who believe it is the end of the world and the end times, and, others who argue that it is frankly, probably an overreaction. I'm a little in the middle. I think that, if we lock ourselves down so well that we pretty much starve out the virus in our nation, it's going to have impact overseas. If visitors are coming, there's going to be extended risks. I think in some ways we may be suffering from an element of mass hysteria, brought about by social media and people being afraid and scared. I'd argue that one should face these things with a stoic attitude. Death is a part of life. It's inevitable. None of us will be spared of that. That and taxes are the two certainties we all have to face. Some people aren't quite as happy to accept that. But you can see Australia, we have done pretty well. Okay, so the total confirmed cases in the US is 2.9 million. Then you have Brazil at 1.6, India at 700,000, Russia at 686, Peru, Chile, the UK, Mexico, Spain, and Iran. Then you've got the global confirmed death rates, now at 500,000. Now, where some people are analysing the data, it's looking like the mortality rate of the illness spiked earlier and is now trending down. One could also argue that's to do with better methodology and testing and more rigorous assessment and understanding of what's going on. Because, mistakes are going to be made. It's going to be tough for people working in these situations. You saw the footage coming out of New York. So let's have a look. Where is Australia? We are pretty... Well, there you go. 8,755 cases. Okay, and we look at Sweden, where they took a less lockdown, a less restrictive approach to their economy, and they have, still a significant number of cases. We can see here, each each area that they have. Where's Sweden? Let's have a look at Sweden. Up here. There we go, Sweden. They have 73,000 confirmed cases. 2,337 deaths. And then if we look at Australia, oh, let's look at Austria, why not? 18,000. 18,706 confirmed deaths. We go all the way down to Australia. Where are we? We're about 2,000, aren't we? Look at Greece, 3,000. Kosovo, 3,500. Thailand, 3,500. Where's Aussie? Where's Australia? There's New Zealand, 1,500. I've probably gone through it. So they've only got 22 deaths. And a lot of people are singing praise upon New Zealand. One thing you have to realize is the emergency bed capacity that New Zealand has is actually quite low compared to other parts of the world. They'll be in a lot of trouble if they get a flood of people. A flood of people coming there. Here we go. Here's Australia. Whoa, okay. 8,755 confirmed cases with 106 deaths. So Perth, they had 621, or Western Australia. The Northern Territory had only 30 with 0 deaths, which I think is quite an achievement there in the NT. The biggest danger is a lot of these remote communities, the remote indigenous communities, because you've got comorbidity factors which can increase your susceptibility to this virus, and sadly a lot of the indigenous Australians are suffering from those. Diabetes, heart disease, all of these issues. South Australia, they've had 443 confirmed cases and 4 deaths. Brisbane, how are we doing? Queensland, 1,068 with 6 deaths. New South Wales, 3,433 with 49 deaths. The ACT, 108 with 3 deaths. Tasmania, 228 with 13 deaths. And then Victoria, 2,824 with 22 deaths. And Victoria had, over 69 additional cases overnight. And that's the biggest fear of this illness, is the fact that, well, you can be walking around asymptomatic and can infect other people. That's the biggest risk factor, the biggest unknown. That's what's scaring everyone. That is what's scaring everyone. So, what we won't know if there's been an overreaction, if these lockdowns have been too much of an overreaction, or if they've been too successful, and we'll never know that. We'll never know that. People are afraid of mass, significant death, significant loss of life, and they are implementing these risk mitigation strategies, and that involves locking down the economy. Now, one could argue that could have other consequences that may offset the benefit or the lives saved by implementing this strategy. We'll never know. That's for the historians to judge and to look at. There's no point getting upset. That's why you open a Bundy and you look at it. But the question is, will the lockdown in Victoria, because 5% of what they have there, 160, the number of confirmed cases and the lockdowns. I'm looking at it here. 191 new cases, so nearly a 10%, or a bit less than 10% increase in the number of cases they've had. So they're going to lock down parts of Melbourne and an entire suburb for 6 weeks. Will they lock down the whole state for 6 weeks? So let's have a look at this before we jump around and look at some other things. So Victoria reimposes lockdowns on metropolitan Melbourne and Mitchell Shire as the coronavirus cases rise by a record amount. And I wonder how many people have actually been getting the illness and haven't been tested or haven't been known. If this record amount rise is the result of rigorous testing rather than any actual difference. That's the consideration. Maybe it isn't as bad as we realize. Maybe they're just doing more rigorous testing. They're testing on every street. Now they're bombarding every suburb with people getting tested. So it seems like we have this higher spike when it's already been doing the rounds. I'd love to see antibody tests if we've suffered by this virus. I mean, I know we've got people in the comments saying, oh, you know, one viewer saying her fiancé had a fever and everything, oh, it's gone the next day. The severity and impact of this is different to people. You know, I was terrified. I had this months ago, remember? It was either a really bad flu, and we called the doctors, and the doctors said, don't come in. Because the issue we had was because Rachel was pregnant then, so there was an element of risk there. And now we've got a young baby. There's another element of risk there as well. But the other thing could be this increase of 191. It could be because the economy's opened up. And people are simply getting frustrated. They're over it. They're over the lockdowns. They're over this. They're over the, oh, will I get it? Won't I get it? They're just going to go stuff it. I don't care anymore. They'll go out there. They'll interact. If they get the illness, they get the illness. If they survive, they survive. If they don't, they don't. People used to do that in the past. Before they had the first vaccine for smallpox. Before they discovered the effectiveness of cowpox as a strategy for providing a vaccination against that illness, people would routinely infect themselves when they were young, fit, and virile to provide protection for later in life. So there is a historical precedent of people taking that argument. And I can see how people can get quite frustrated and just start going about their normal day-to-day lives. Are you seeing any people out there even worrying about social distancing anymore? You know, are people all laissez-faire? How many people do you see with masks anymore? How many people just go, you know what? If I get it, I get it. What do you think, everyone? What's your take on it? Let me know. So Victoria will reimpose Stage 3 restrictions for 6 weeks in metropolitan Melbourne and the Mitchell Shire in a bid to slow a rapid spread of the coronavirus. Premier Daniel Andrews announced the stay-at-home orders would be reimposed from midnight tomorrow night. There are 191 new confirmed cases announced today, with 37 linked to known outbreaks and the remaining 154 under investigation. Mr. Andrews said the new restrictions were the result of the unacceptable high number of new cases. It is simply impossible, with case rates at these levels, to have enough contact tracing staff to have physical resources in order to suppress and contain the virus without taking significant steps, he said. Mr. Andrews said people acting as if the pandemic was over was not the answer. It is part of the problem. He said the virus had leaked from postcodes already under stay-at-home orders to other parts of Melbourne. We know we are on the cusp of something very, very bad if we don't take these steps today, he said. And will these steps even be enough? Because it's 2 weeks before people started showing symptoms. Or maybe they're capturing how many. I'd like to know how many of the 191 are asymptomatic, aren't showing any signs yet. You know. Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton said there was a unanimous view on the need to impose the new restrictions. This is required to avoid absolutely catastrophic outcomes, indeed thousands of cases per day, he said. I know that we will already see deaths from the cases that we have occurring every day. What I do not want to see is any more deaths than are already predicted. So here's the question for the good Premier, Mr. Andrews, Mr. I am the law. What steps have you taken to improve the ICU capacity in Victoria? We've had months of lockdown. Isn't that the whole point of it? To convert other rooms to ICU facilities, to build emergency fever centres around the state. To address this? My understanding was the whole point of implementing these lockdowns was so we could avoid the huge numbers of other countries. And here you can see the confirmed cases. Look how they're shooting up. And you've got the deaths and recoveries. Wasn't that the point? Was to buy us time? Or is it just the fact that our health system can't cope, no matter what we do? It can spread too far and too wide. So, Professor Sutton said there were currently about 5,000 close contacts of the state's active cases. The Premier warns the virus will kill thousands of people if it gets completely away from us. That will be more than inconvenient. It will be tragic, he said. I mean, it's a tough situation. The sad thing is, these leaders, these politicians, are going to feel the burden of this. on their shoulders if these people die. And frankly, it may not even be deserved. There can only be so much you can do. There can only be so much you can do. You know, cafes, restaurants are back to takeaway only. And here we're seeing, we'll have a look, we'll jump over here. This is Mitchell Shire. This shire has been shut down, north of Melbourne. Now, we'll start to see, you know, the economic impact of this. Is this the beginning of the second wave? What if it shuts down Melbourne and Victoria? What if the whole state? Well, they can't go to New South Wales anymore. 6 weeks. Another month and a half. What happens again? My understanding was a lot of this was from lax hotel security, lax quarantining. That's the thing is, it's so easy to infect people with this. It's so easy to infect them indoors too. Under the Stage 3 restrictions, people are only allowed to leave their homes for 4 main reasons: work or study, exercise, shopping for supplies, medical care, and caregiving. And I'm assuming this is only people who are not infected. You would hope people that are infected realize to stay at home or are in hospital getting the help they need. Mr. Andrews said the restrictions would be slightly different to those imposed across the state in May. People will not be allowed to leave the lockdown areas for exercise, and no one will be able to go into a second home outside of metropolitan Melbourne, sorry. Retail and hairdressers will remain open, but cafes, restaurants, and pubs within the restricted zones will return to takeaway only. Why are retail and hairdressers open? Doesn't that pose a risk? Mr. Andrews said he spoke with the Prime Minister early today and asked for a further 260 Australian Defence Force personnel to help with on-the-ground support alongside Victorian Police. He warned police would be out on the road making sure people were not travelling for the wrong reasons. So metropolitan Melbourne, also known as Greater Melbourne, includes 31 municipalities: Bunyul, Bayside, Boroondara, Brimbank, Carinda, Casey, Darwin, Frankston, Glenera, Greater Dandenong, okay, so it would be close to where I grew up, Hobson Bay, Hume, Kingston, Knox, Manningham, Maribyrnong, Moorenda, Melbourne, Melton, Monash, Moonee Valley, Moreland, Mornington Peninsula, Nillumbik, Port Phillip, Stonington, Whitehorse, Whittlesea, Windenham, Yarra and Yarra Ranges. The Mitchell Shire includes towns such as Broadford and Wayland and is not part of metropolitan Melbourne, but is covered by the lockdown. So specialist schools and VCE students, those in years 11 and 12 in Melbourne and Mitchells and Shire, will return to school as normal next week. All the students are able to maintain physical distancing and can be much more careful getting to and from school, Mr. Andrews said. Well, yeah, he's right there. We've got a project right now we're working on, which is a primary school. Physical distancing among young kids. It's just impossible. It's just impossible. The risk from the children is not to the children, my understanding. It's to them passing on to older people. It's to their grandparents. And it's bloody cruel for grandparents not being able to hug their grandchildren. It's you know, how many of them are just going, nah, stuff it. I'll risk it. We all got to go sometime. Year 10 students doing VCE subjects will be able to attend school for those subjects. Other students will have the school holiday period extended by 1 week. So I guess that some kids will enjoy the extra week holiday, but then it'll get bored after a while, won't it? And this is not the reason why you want a holiday extended. The entire economy locked down. Mr. Andrews said further announcements about Term 3 for those in prep to Year 10 will be made soon. Aim for lockdown towers to be on the same foot as rest of Melbourne. About 3,000 residents of 9 public housing towers in Flemington and Kingsington are currently under strict detention orders, meaning they are forbidden from leaving their homes. There are now 69 infections linked to those estates. Concerns have been raised about the sudden nature of the lockdown and the delivery of essential services to the lockdown residents, many of whom are vulnerable. Did we all see Pauline Hanson's comments? I wanted to do a video on it, but I think I'll just discuss it here, about these lockdowns on the towers. Remember that? And she's making all these comments critical of well, there's some people there who have drug problems and alcohol problems, and it all came out that she was being racist. I don't recall her mentioning anything about the race of the occupants of those towers. I think that was completely irrelevant. And, well, if there are people in there that have greater, well, I can't be talking, alcohol, we all like it. Or if they have drug issues in those communities, that's something that needs to be addressed, and that's got nothing to do with the race of the occupants in there. Frankly, if you look at those buildings, and if you've got a hopeless, depressed life, I can understand why people might turn to stimulants as a way of hope. It's not what you should do, and it's a sign of greater problems, but that's got nothing to do with the type of people who are living there. I thought in some ways it was just, well, it was quite clear the identity politics and just how these leftists and people in the media perceive the people they want to keep in these housing. I'm really hoping this will be a wake-up call for some of the poor people in these bloody houses. Bloody public housing, knowing not to trust the state. Get out, one way or another. The tower lockdown could last at least 14 days, but the Premier said the strategy was to have the residents on the same footing as the rest of Melbourne as soon as possible. We may have to put in some very specialised and targeted support for those people who test positive, he said. I mean, here's the thing. You've seen the images of those towers. Would the airflow in there be sufficient enough to reduce the mitigation for cross-infection? Wouldn't they be the worst places for people to be to spread this illness? This is not going to last for a moment longer than it needs to. Oh, it might. It'll probably be back. They are challenging measures, but they are proportionate to the risk. Are they? There's the question. What assessment has been done? You're restricting the freedom of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of citizens to go about their day-to-day business, to take their own risk mitigation strategies, for the mortality rate that's questionable at best. You're removing the right for people to take their own risk. But the argument is we can't have them doing that. They might infect someone else. Such is life, everyone. You could get hit by a car when you leave out. What's the greater risk? Mr. Andrews said hundreds of staff were going door to door to talk to people and asking residents to be tested. He said priority was given to the tests from tower residents. So stage 3 restrictions mean you have to stay at home except for shopping for food and essential items, medical care and caregiving, work and study if you can't do it from home, and exercise, but don't leave or enter restricted areas. There you have it, everyone. Another 6 weeks of lockdown in Victoria. It doesn't appear we're going to have this V-shaped recovery everyone is hoping for. And, well, a lot of people around the world are getting affected by this. I mean, just look at the United States, everyone. 2.9 million confirmed cases. 130,000 deaths. One thing that's interesting is an article I read from Germany, where, with regards to the deaths, statistically they would have died anyway in that time period. One of the biggest risks, my understanding is aged care homes and people being exposed in those environments. I mean, the problem is whenever there's any illness, even a flu, even diarrhea can go through those communities. It goes through like wildfire. And you've got people in a very weakened state, usually close to the end of their lives, and they block you all off. They do all these restrictions. When we had to visit my father when he was in a home, when they had, I think, a stomach bug was going through, and we all had to clear everything. Everyone was wearing masks because there's that element of risk to that portion of the population. So we'll have to see. I suspect in Ireland there were some people sent back to the homes without getting tested, and it sounds like it's been a nightmare. Big mess up over there. And I'd argue a lot of this is incompetence and maybe a lot of fear. So it looks like Victoria is getting locked down. We'll have to see. Will that contain the illness to the socialist utopia of Australia? Are you living in these lockdowns? What do you plan to do? Do you think 6 weeks will be enough? Where do you think the next potential risk will be? As always, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Drink your rum responsibly. Good old Bundy rum. Hashtag not sponsored, but bloody oath, I wouldn't mind. Take care. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. If you're a fan of the channel and want to support the content I create here, there are a few ways you can. You can join us on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us via our affiliate links at Amazon, eBay, Independent Reserve, or Kucoin. You can buy merch from HeiseSays. You can support us via PayPal or Gold Pass. Take care. I'll see you next time.